Allegoria comes at you heavily right from its opening with 3 big hits. Number 1 is called Allegoria, which is a horribly pretentious, totally meaningless title for a film. Number 2 is opening credits do that alternating bold colour scheme thing that Stanley Kubrick did for the absolutely brilliant opening titles for A Clockwork Orange. And if you're going to be invoking Clockwork Orange, you've got to be damn sure that you're doing it for a good reason. And number 3 is that Allegoria is written and directed by a guy called Spider One. Now, Spider One is, as his name would suggest, not just your normal director, but he's actually in fact a musician, and Allegoria is his big crack at branching out. He's following in the footsteps of his illustrious brother, who's also a musician turned director, a guy by the name of Rob Zombie. That's right, this is a horror film directed by Rob Zombie's brother. Now, that's pretty strange, that our friend Spider has decided to try his hand at directing at the same time as Rob Zombie's releasing his Monsters film. Now, whereas the Monsters film, which I did actually quite like for the very reasons that it is so atypical of Rob Zombie's work, because it does show that different, kind of warm-hearted, slightly playful side to him, Allegoria is the kind of low-grade, ugly, self-important nonsense that you'd expect to come from somebody that grew up idolising Rob Zombie films. Because, to be honest, Allegoria is about as good a film as Spider One is a good name for a human being. It's an anthology film about, well, to be honest, about nothing. The official plot synopsis reads, a group of artists' lives become unwittingly entangled as their obsessions and insecurities manifest monsters, demons, and death. What we really get are just this series of totally pointless, plotless snippets of empty, flashy, shot like a music video nothingness. Stories without a beginning, middle and end, no clever twist, just vague, fragmentary bits of noise jumbled about in this chaotic mess. There's some attempts to make out a kind of trick-or-treat style collage out of the various fragments, to sort of tie unrelated events together in a kind of loose patchwork, where the stories kind of weave in and out of each other, events from one story are referenced in the next, and there's lip service paid to this kind of dovetailing of thematic ideas to do with art and death and blah blah blah. Really, it's just terrible college student pseudo-philosophical posturing, relayed to us in a way that's about as interesting as having a conversation with someone that's stoned who thinks they're being profound, but doesn't actually realise that they're just stringing together a series of totally banal aphorisms. There are flashes of hideous pretension in Allegoria for sure. I think what's worse though, at the end of the day, is that it's just so fucking boring. It becomes clear very early on that this isn't an anthology film in the sense that it's a series of stories, because none of the broken, jumbled pieces line up into any kind of a cohesive story. It runs to 70 minutes plus credits. You might think that means that this is a 90-minute film with all the padding chopped out, but no, it barely limps over that 70-minute mark, with a story so slight, a reason to exist so flimsy, and offering so little entertainment that no amount of chopping down could leave you with a decent finished film. There's actually a point about 2/3 of the way through where characters suddenly resort to just speaking incredibly slowly, just to pad the running time out, moving slowly, droning on, just saying nothing and doing nothing. And then it just stops. Now, I've seen this compared to Glenn Danzig's Verotica, which was, in a similar way, a film that was made by a musician, this ill-judged anthology film that demonstrated a spectacular level of hubris and a lack of any self-awareness when it came to how to actually make a film. I know some people think that Verotica is some kind of car crash, so bad it's good masterpiece, but what I will say is that I personally think that it's a lot better of a film than Allegoria. And Verotica, lest we forget, was a film that did have lengthy scenes in it, set in a real strip club with real strippers in it, just because Glenn Danzig fancied going to his strip club. There's one particular story, or bit of story, that reminded me more of The Perfect House, which was this really disgustingly nasty anthology film that I spoke about when I was doing the 31 Days of Felissa Rose that I absolutely hated. This isn't uniformly the same kind of masochistic experience in the same way that watching that film was, but it's nasty and just casually misanthropic in a way that makes it just impossible to have any sympathies with the director himself. And the weird thing is that there are actually some okay people in this film. Chrissy Fox and Josephine Chang, I think, both give good performances. Both of them turned up in a film that came out last year called Frank, which had Bonnie Aarons from The Nun in it, which I mention only because it was actually directed by Chrissy Fox, and pretty much the whole cast of Frank actually turn up in Allegoria. To be honest, I didn't really like Frank as a film, but it's interesting just seeing kind of how closely interconnected these two films seem to be. Oh, and Scout Taylor Compton turns up as well, which, to be honest, isn't exactly something to be that proud of if she's your big name star.
Completely 100% not offended.
Really?
Yeah.
So the thing is, it's hard to see Allegoria as anything other than just a total utter folly, a complete waste of time and money, because the end product really isn't even a film, just this assemblage of parts. The idea that the actual finished product is a collage that you're meant to find interesting as this kind of multifaceted, kaleidoscopic work of art might work if any effort had actually gone into writing some decent stories instead of just filming the first shit that comes into your head, then retroactively trying to tie it all together, which is totally what this feels like to me. When it isn't screaming trite philosophy at you, which is, to be honest, about half of the runtime, it's jittering about impatiently 1 minute, then moving at a snail's pace the next. Is it any fun to watch? I'm afraid not. Is it the worst film ever? No, it's just totally nothing. It's not bad enough to be memorable, or even unique enough to get points for originality. I've seen cheaper looking films, but that just means that I'm watching someone who knows what they're doing, but doesn't know how to actually make a film or tell a story. I mean, you can say that yeah, maybe on a technical level, some of it's filmed reasonably well, but that's the absolute bare minimum. There's really nothing you can single out of this to say, well, I can see that there's some promise, some good points you could build on, it's just a total mess, but it's a mess that feels like it's been made by somebody that's totally happy with the way it's turned out. That I'm sure Spider-1 himself thinks that he's making some deep, profound horror film that's out to shock its audience with its metaphysical themes, instead of just being a barely competent mashing together of about 5 shitty little non-stories all wrapped up in art school pretension.
This is hell!
To be honest, whatever you want to say about Rob Zombie, the guy actually knows how to make films as well as doing all his music stuff. Spider-1, on the other hand, he's just not quite got there yet. Although I will say that this film does feature my favourite line of dialogue from the entire year so far.